If you haven't done so already and you're here during the live session, please make sure to put your name in the chat for attendance purposes. Good afternoon. Thank you to those of you who are here with us live, and hello to all of you watching on the online archive. Hope everybody had a great weekend and is doing well. We're going to do our another class on Pierre Bourdieu today. We're going to be focusing on his concept of habitus or habitus. I've never exactly been sure how to say this word correctly because it's a sort of kind of a made up word, um, but something along the line of the habits that people utilize in everyday life and social life that is part of how social reproduction and power and inequality are reproduced. So we're going to dig into that concept a little bit more today after having spent Wednesday's class on the question of cultural capital and distinction. So let me pull up go to the screen share mode and pull up the PowerPoint that I've been sort of going back and forth between some classes, just in terms of Bourdieu's key concepts and how we've been looking at habitus to this point as a kind of interpretive schema for practice that is largely unconscious. I like to think of that as almost like a kind of a filter of perception that we all have. That's how I take to mean like interpretive schema, a kind of a filter that we use to understand and perceive the world around us, that then we act based upon our perceptions and our interpretations. We first must interpret and perceive the world as it comes to us, and then act on the basis of our interpretations and perceptions. And those are largely unconscious in the sense that, like, with the word habitus, it suggests a certain kind of like a reflex, something that we don't necessarily put a lot of thought into, and that we really don't have time to put a lot of thought into. It kind of happens more or less like kind of automatically. So a habitus is something that is shaped by society, it is shaped by history, it is shaped by these forces that are larger than us as individuals, and yet it feels natural, it feels unconscious, it feels kind of like a reflex. We don't necessarily realize the extent to which society has inculcated all of us with this kind of a particular kind of habitus. And the habitus is, as we've been talking about, shaped by larger social factors like class, race, gender, sexuality. All of these things come into play in shaping our habitus. And Bourdieu's point about this that is very significant to this question of like power and inequality is that habitus both produces the structure and is reproduced by it. So habitus, as we will be looking at today in more depth, is kind of like how Bourdieu attempts to solve the structure and agency question. How he tries to find a point of connection between the larger social structure and the way that it impacts us as individuals, that shapes our agency, that shapes even the most, personal aspects of our lives, our relationships to our bodies, etc. So habitus is kind of the concept we're putting in the spotlight today, and thinking about its role in um, as it says here, both being produced by the structure and reproducing that structure in society. I wanted to pull up a little bit of the perusal to um, highlight some of the text where Bourdieu introduces these terms. Um, in reading the text, I'm reminded of how difficult Bourdieu is as a writer. You have some of my sympathy here. Their sentences are very, very long. Um, there's a lot of sort of like parenthetical asides that are kind of like sandwiched into a sentence. Um, and just a lot of commas, a lot of clauses. Um, so I feel like maybe more than any of the other theorists we've studied this semester, um, Bourdieu is somebody that like it might be helpful to kind of walk through a bit of his language just to kind of decipher a bit of what he was talking about. Um, as far as the concept of habitus, I think like this is probably um, these two sort of paragraphs. Let's see, this one here. And this generated a pretty good amount of discussion among you all as in the perusal chat, where he talks about the conditionings associated with a particular class of conditions of existence produce habitus. And here he defines it as systems of durable, transposable dispositions. The word that he uses, dispositions, he frequently comes back to. And I understand that word dispositions to mean kind of like, again, like kind of a scheme of perception, like a filter or like a set of glasses through which we see the world. And also disposition, in a kind of like personal kind of way, like our character, our the way that we walk and talk, our sort of gestures, our postures, our relationships to our body, all of that I think is he intends to try to uh, cover with this like umbrella term of disposition. And then he also has this this real gem here. Structured structures predisposed to function as structuring structures. Oh, good Lord. Um, but you get the idea here of like he's trying to kind of like draw like a reciprocal relationship, like a circle, so that these dispositions are both structured in the sense that they're determined or shaped by larger forces, but they're also structuring in the sense that like they help to then like reproduce the structure that produced them in the first place. So you get a very kind of like circular or reciprocal, like a feedback loop in which like the habitus is both by structured by society and helps to reproduce it, to restructure it. I hope that helps you to make sense of this in a way that is maybe a little bit more clear. I thought that there's a good discussion here among Joshua, Steve, Andrea, and Jill, where you're talking here about like how to understand this concept of habitus here. Um, I also like this last sort of paragraph, this next paragraph, where he talks about habitus, and I think that Jill brought up, and Kay sort of brought up the example that I had talked about last week about how I noticed habitus and a certain kind of cultural capital at work in my students, and how it's different to teach at like a more elite or more privileged student body versus teaching like a more like working class student body. And as I said, the difference is not really at all about the intelligence or the natural talent, which, as in my experience, is pretty equal. You know, there's always a range, there's always a spectrum. You have some students that are, you know, naturally more gifted in certain areas than others. You know, it's not that everybody's the same, but from institution to institution, I'm basically like, the conclusion I've drawn over the years is just like students are students in terms of their range of abilities. But what is different, very noticeably different to me, is this kind of like habitus, this this kind of like self assuredness, the kind of self confidence that you're more likely to find in the more privileged sectors of society, you know. And it was so, it's not that those kids, you know, at like Colgate or St. Mary's or some of these other places that I've taught are necessarily any smarter than students in the CSU system. And in fact, I don't find that to be the case at all. But there is a certain, I keep coming back to the term like self assurance or confidence or entitlement, you know, might be a little harsher way of putting it. But that is the kind of like the noticeable distinction. And again, remember that what Bourdieu is trying to explain is how habitus, you know, is not only shaped by the system, but effectively reproduces it, so that students, for example, from more privileged backgrounds who go into the world with that much more self assurance and self confidence, they're more likely to like come out ahead. Again, not because they're any more smarter or any more talented than students from working class backgrounds, but because they have that kind of like the habitus of privilege. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure to point out too is that he says like the other part of like habitus for like people of more working class background is a lot of times people kind of like self exclude themselves, like where they say, well, you know, that's not like for the likes of us, you know, or that's not something that we, or, you know, like a person from my background could aspire to, you know, that people, the way that Bourdieu talks about it, you know, down here is more in terms of like people decide like, oh well, that's not like realistic for someone like me, you know. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because like you just like you drop out or you don't pursue the thing, or you just think like, you know, this is just something I can't do. I have noticed this a lot with students too, that like there's he defined it here. This is the passage that I was looking for, where Bourdieu says, agents shape their aspirations according to concrete indices of the accessible and the inaccessible, of what is and is not for us, he puts in quotation marks, a division as fundamental and as fundamentally recognized as that between the sacred and the profane. So people's aspirations, their ambitions, what they think they can achieve, what they hope to achieve, is also shaped by this larger structure, and it says that certain things are appropriate for certain kinds of people and other things are not. As a teacher, I have noticed this in a number of different ways. Like the classic example is like, girls or young women who say they can't do math. And you just like think that like, like, oh, I just, math, I can't do like statistics and sociology or, mathematical kind of things. And it's hard to say whether it's like, is it really that you can't do math or that you have like this story in your head about how you can't do math, and that becomes like a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where you end up kind of like, just like removing yourself from the competition, before it's even, happened. And I find that a lot with like students in from more like working class backgrounds, how they, you know, people often more often feel like not confident in their writing ability. Um, and so there's a certain, kind of anxiety there that like, whereas, students of more privileged backgrounds, again, it's not that they're better writers, but they don't have as much as like of the second guessing of the like the inner self doubt about it, and they've more often been in primary schools that encouraged them to express themselves verbally, and in writing, and so writing doesn't feel as, as much of a like an anxious enterprise, you know. Um, so again, this is kind of like how the reproduction of inequalities work in a society, through these kind of like subtle ways. I mean, the way that habitus works, is very like sometimes hard to perceive. It's like under the radar, you know, and so for those reasons, I've enjoyed engaging with Bourdieu this last week around this question. I've been thinking about it with regard to gender too, like how the habitus of um, our kind of like our scripts for masculinity and femininity in the society. I wanted to show like a quick clip from a movie that I think illustrates this in a really funny way. Some of you may have seen this movie before. It's from the 90s. It's called The Birdcage. Um, and I think it has a really funny commentary about the habitus of masculinity, which is a thing I've been thinking about. Like how, what so-called real men do in terms of like how you walk, how you talk, how you eat your food, like a whole set of performances that, we are like socialized into, and yet it seems to come naturally, right? Like it seems like a thing you don't have to really think about. A thing, as Bourdieu would say, like it goes without saying, so it becomes like second nature. And so this clip in this film, I don't know how many of you have seen this, probably a number of you, but it's always fun to kind of revisit. And this is only a few minutes long. Um, in the film, um, the basic premise is like Robin Williams and Nathan Lane are like a gay couple, and Robin Williams has like a son from a previous relationship in which, and the son is going to marry the daughter of a really conservative couple, like he's a right wing politician. It's played by Gene Hackman, and and so they're like freaking out because they're like a gay couple and they're and these like conservative Republican senators are like coming to their home and they're trying to make a good impression. And so they're like, okay, the first thing they're going to try to do is they're going to try to get Nathan Lane's character, who has a very kind of like effeminate habitus in terms of like his body and the way he talks and the way he walks and stuff. And they're going to try to make him, kind of like perform like a so-called real man. So the scene here is with Robin Williams trying to correct Nathan Lane's character into showing him how to be a real man and like how not to be a real man, like what not to do with your body or your pinky, or how not to hold your knife and fork and stuff like that. So let me just show you this, and then I'll show you another little scene from there.
Oh God, I don't think I can make it upstairs. Wait here and I'll bring to my step. No. Don't make me. Pinky down, up again. All right, your pot. Get you to act like a man. All right. All right. Now this is a dinner party. Let's work with food. Right? Spread some mustard on the toast. Don't move the spoon and don't dribble little dots of mustard. No? No. You take your knife and you smear. Men smear. Smear. That's it. Yes. Yeah. Get the goddamn pinky down. Right, make your fingers like iron, all right? Yeah, stop trembling. Hold the knife boldly. So what? Couldn't we start with someone easier? Come on, you're a big fan. Got a very distinctive walk. Very easy to imitate. And if anyone was a man, all right, now try it. Just get off your horse and head into the saloon. Nice touch. Howdy, man. No good? Actually, it's perfect. I just never realized John Wayne walked like that. He bumped into me. Tough gazungus. Why are you being such a prick? Why are you being such an asshole? Are you calling me an asshole? Actually, looking at the asshole behind you. Forgive me for being.
Hey, wait, I want to just stop just there for a second.
Senator Keeley.
Okay. Did you guys hear and see that? Wait. Okay. I think I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Could you hear and see that clip?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. I was like, wasn't sure about the thing about it. Have you seen that before?
I've watched it a few times. I love that movie.
I like it just in terms of like what it's showing about Um, it kind of circles us back to what Irving Goffman was talking about, who we studied a few weeks ago, the performance of self, the presentation of self in everyday life, the idea of like, that society is like a theater, all the world's a stage. We all have these kind of scripts that we inherit about how to perform certain kinds of roles, um, you know, and then uh, how also how to like to not do certain kinds of roles. So the thing with his like pinky, like don't do that, like that. Socialization is always about like not just learning what to do, but what not to do. And like we get sanctioned or punished or, like made fun of in certain kinds of ways when we don't perform the expected role for our audience. And that's like how we learn, and that's kind of like what holds people into place is a certain like um, anxiety about doing it wrong, or looking funny or weird, and that kind of like ensures a certain kind of conformity. And the thing is that I also like about that clip is that like it's kind of like, yeah, Goffman's right, like, society's like all the world's a stage and we're all performing and all this kind of thing. But the thing with habitus that I think makes it kind of a superior concept to explain these sorts of things is that when we're performing, like it often doesn't feel like a performance. And that's the difference with acting is like our, especially like our gender habitus or something, like, it feels like second nature, even though it's something like we've learned and we've been taught and we've been like socialized into. It's something that feels more like unconscious. We don't have to think about it. It comes like as second nature to us. It's habit, you know.
I was
And
having
that,
sound issues just a second ago. I think other people might be too. I fixed
oh,
it by taking my Bluetooth off, but I don't know.
oh, can you guys hear? Can
For
you guys?
maybe like 30 seconds or 40 or something like that.
Oh no.
I don't
How
know if it was everybody, but
how's everybody doing? Can you hear me? Is everything okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right.
Maybe it was just me. It's fine.
Okay. Cool. Appreciate the many thumbs ups. um, I just wondered like if people had sort of thoughts about that, as far as like habitus, the way that we might apply this concept in different kinds of ways and settings. People have thoughts about this who are here.
I mean, I kind of see it, and like, I feel like when you're going to the grocery store, like, depending on the grocery store you use and things like that, that's just kind of the social, yeah, the social habits that you have are going to bring you back to certain areas over and over again.
Yeah. So that's kind of germane to what we talked about on Wednesday's class too, about
Yeah.
a certain amount of like taste.
Yeah. Um, as far as the birdcage goes and the physical habits that you form over time, I mean, those are going to be your like mannerisms and things like that.
Yeah.
The table manners and things like that kind of represent your habitus.
Yeah. And Bourdieu talks about how the family is kind of like the mediating institution in terms of like how these larger structures are passed down and then reproduced in children, right? So, you know, these matters of like etiquette and
Yeah.
taste and manners.
I think in like child development classes that I took, probably 10 plus years ago, they definitely discuss that um, your family is your first sense of socialization,
Right.
which
Right.
is
So
kind of on par with that. You don't get socialized outside of the family until you're like school level, but your
for,
family is going to, select what school you're going to go to.
for sure.
So,
And then it becomes like as kids get older, like their peer group and their the media come to play an increasingly prevalent role in socializing kids. Um, and so in that way, I would argue like that's one of the ways that the many ways that our society is changing is just like kids get older at a younger age because they are introduced more and more
because of the
to
exposure from media, the
yeah
earlier exposure, because
yeah that's
millennial age was like the first people online in like their teen years. But before that, I mean, your media was, Friday night television. Maybe your parents were watching the news. What were you influenced on your Saturday morning cartoons, etc.?
yeah.
That.
So it's just like there's more of it at a young age. It's not like a new thing, but there's just kind of like quantitatively, there's just more kind of, screen time or what have you, that kids, the phrase that they have in marketing is kids are getting older younger, meaning like kids like say in their tweens, preteen kids are just like exposed to and familiar with more adult themes and such than they were in previous generations.
Yeah,
You know,
we're like eliminating the time that it takes to experience childhood.
yeah, and childhood socialization generally presupposes a certain amount of like sheltering.
Hmm.
Like you kind of sequester the kids from those kinds of adult things, and anybody who's a parent of a teen or a preteen will probably tell you that that's increasingly impossible. Like there's just like there's no it's increasingly impossible to concoct some kind of bubble.
Yeah, my
um
son is 5 right now, and grandmother keeps saying, when can he get a cell phone?" I'm
oh
like, oh
goodness,
my gosh. He can have a flip phone until he's 18.
yeah. I kind of
That's,
personally think I kind of personally wish we all went back to flip phones.
yeah.
But that's
I
just me.
I did a silly, a stupid smart thing the other day. I bought another screen. I bought an iPad for the first time to put my social media on my iPad and take my social media off my phone. And I'm like, this is really stupid to purchase another screen to avoid screen time. But it's been working, so I don't know.
Wow. Whatever it takes.
But yeah,
No.
as far as childhood goes, I'm like, I don't want that. But they integrate, Chromebooks in schools.
Yeah.
So that you can learn how to navigate those things, as you need to.
Yeah. I kind of feel like the lesson is it's not really like the technology per se that is the problem. right? But like this is more sort of like the context of how it's used and what it's used for,
The
and
habits that we're building.
yeah, you might say, and I, I do think like technology is a certain part of the problem insofar as like the distraction and the sort of like absence, the lack of like long-term attention that I notice among younger and younger people. The just the inability to stay focused on something for a certain amount of time, and I think that that's manifest in like people don't read as much, or they even have like a hard time getting through a 2 hour movie, or there's just so many forces competing for the attention of people. This what they call the attention economy, and where there's just this constant, ongoing competition. You know, go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I feel like technology, like you said, at its core isn't the problem. I think, but I guess the thing is, but I think it was just like inevitable that it kind of plays into people's like primal desires for like acceptance and like the need for validation. So like I think unfortunately it was inevitable, as soon as like the boom started, specifically social media, like I think this was like unfortunately I do think it's inevitable, and I just think it's the good thing is that we have like agency, and I guess it's like all about like, what you choose to do with social media, like I know, I guess it's up to the individual to either, give in to that desire, that need, or I guess it's up to you to kind of be like, you know what? No, I'm gonna go outside and like not scroll for like X amount of time.
Hmm. Yeah. You said that
Self-discipline is important. That's an important part.
it is the self-discipline part is kind of a lost art. Like they're just,
And I know it's hard because I know it kind of like circles back to what we were talking about initially, about I can't pronounce the word habit.
habitus. Yeah. Let's just go with habitus. But I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
I feel like, you kind of internalize, like your environment, what you're subjected to. You kind of
Mhm.
so I don't know if it correlates to that, but I do think, especially like when you're growing up, it's even harder for you to have self-discipline. I think you're more susceptible to, the people around you, the what you consume, everything like that. So, I say, oh, we all have agency, but realistically, especially for like kids or like, people growing up into this environment, I think it just becomes harder because like again, you just kind of internalize, or you become kind of like what you see, and what you grow up with and things like that.
Yeah. And you had mentioned, Kai, like that these social media kind of like they play on people's desires, or like you said their most base desires, and and I would say that part of that too is also playing on people's base fears, that these things I think especially play on our anxieties about um, being like disconnected or being like left out, like these really primal social fears that we have, of like not being invited to the party, or like people are making fun of you,
Def
like really base primal fear.
Definitely. And I think that like, as adults, it's easier for us to kind of, not like like give into that, I guess, but again, for like, people that are more susceptible, like, kids or young adults growing up, it's just more difficult, because you're right, it does play on when you're growing up, you do have like this incessant like desire that you want to be accepted by,
Mhm.
the people around you and like, your friends. You want to be a part of the cool crowd and this, that, and the fourth. So definitely, it plays on, and I think that's why like I know we talked about this before, but like, there's a rise specifically with younger people, with like, all these like depression and, X, Y, and Z, because, it's harder for them to kind of like not give into it, I guess.
Yeah, the anxiety. If I had to put one word onto it, like it's like an anxious generation to me,
Right.
what I see. And that I think was like heading in that direction. I mean, if you just look at the number of people who are treated for various symptoms of anxiety or manifestations of anxiety, um, it really is like a kind of an anxious generation. And I always think of it in terms of this thing in I don't know if this was around before social media, but the expression FOMO, like the fear of missing out, you know,
Okay.
like that's another one of these things of like how social media kind of preys upon these really base um, anxieties that are rooted in our social relationships, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something, and, again, like, I know, like, the older you get, the easier it is for you to kind of
Yeah.
like take advantage of your agency and kind of be like, no, I'm not gonna give into this, or I choose to do something else. But like, it's not as easy for other people, especially, when you're really younger, teenage years and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like these anxieties about social relationships are really acute when we're in our teen years and junior high school and high school. That was definitely when I felt them most strongly. Um, but they never really like go away. Like they fade and they might become, less and less important over time. People, like another expression of our times is like people are like, well, I've run out of fucks to give. I don't like, I can't give a fuck anymore about what people think or what people say or blah blah blah. Where in high school, you have like an infinite amount of fucks to give in in that environment. You know what I mean? Like, but they never, in my experience at least, like I've never gotten to that point where I just like didn't, like I've never run out of fucks to give. Like I still um, worry and think about what people think.
I think that the people that say that are showboating.
I think so too. I
I'm
like
like,
that. That's always been
to
my.
some extent, you care.
Of course, and like you wouldn't
And
really
if
be
the
a full human
persona that you
being.
want to show others is that you don't care, then you still care about showing people a persona.
Exactly.
I think it's the
Exactly.
college spectrum. Like I'm 30, and I feel like I'm to the point where like don't I guess the fucks that I have to give are very minor. Like, it's there, but it's not as prevalent as it was when I was younger.
Right.
Like, it's I guess I care more so about the people in my circle, you know what I mean? Like I do care how you perceive me because I care about you. But like some random person on the street or like somebody, these randoms on like IG or whatever, it's not very strong as it was, when I was a teenager. I wanted validation from everybody. And
Yeah, the peer pressure hits different in your 30s.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it really it does, and you do become more things. I don't know. Your inner circle becomes tighter as you get older, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the circle of trust and
Mhm.
the people that you really are concerned with just becomes like maybe kind of smaller. I've still found myself, and this kind of like circles, back into some of Bourdieu's main concerns with like around taste. Like I have still, well into my 50s been concerned with like, do people think I have like good taste or bad taste in music, or like movies or, just, dinner party conversations about, shows that we're watching on Netflix or something like that. I'm like, I still got this thing from high school where I want people to like, think I'm smart and cool, and like maybe the anxiety is not as like acute as it was as a teenager, but there's still like a kind of a social desire for, approval, or at least like if I can't get approval, to at least just not sound like an idiot, like just to not sound like, like some uncultured rube with bad taste in, food or wine, or, doesn't know how to use the right fork kind of thing.
Or that you don't have that streaming service. You don't have Apple TV, so you can't talk to everybody about Ted Lasso.
Right. Oh,
Have
that
whatever is on
too.
HBO Max or whatever. You have to have all the streaming services now to be included in all the conversations about TV shows, all the hot new TV shows. And I don't know. I find that to be
Yeah.
ridiculous. It really frustrates me. I do have FOMO for that.
That is a good example of how cultural capital is kind of dependent on a certain amount of economic capital. Like you have to have the money to do these things,
Yeah.
like you have to, like I was talking with yesterday, a friend of mine who lives most of the year in Thailand, and was, visiting the Bay Area, and we were like catching up and stuff, and I was just like, yeah, I really want to go to Thailand, and I'd want to see it, but I've never even been close to that part of the world. And his background is a little more like he had a little more money growing up, and also more like leisure time, so this is a kind of thing with like what privilege and economic capital buys you, for a lot of people, is like the ability to travel and see the world and go places and do these things. And, like it just presupposes a certain amount of money, and not just money, but like time, free time. Like, I'm like, yeah, I have a summer vacation, but like, otherwise, like I can't just like, jet off somewhere in the middle of the semester. Like I got a teaching schedule. I've always had one. I've always been working, and, that just kind of reminded me too of like this like what class buys you. It's just a certain kind of like, cosmopolitanism. Um, and yeah, so I don't know if you've had like analogous kind of experiences like that. But I think, to your point, Jill, about, um, having conversations about, shows that are streaming or whatever. Yeah, that also, yeah, it presupposes a certain access to economic capital. Before you can even get the cultural capital, you have to have the economic capital. So it's like to Bourdieu's point. All right, that was fun. Let me go back to screen share actually for a second. Not that one either. Okay, well, so these were the speaking of, economic capital, cultural capital, social capital. These were the sort of like the key concepts that Bourdieu tries to use to explain, again, like sort of like the reproduction of inequality. This is the work that he's most famous for, um, in looking at the school system. I wanted to show you a little clip from a documentary. I've been talking about this for some time. I just want to show you a little clip from this where Bourdieu is talking. Um, I put this documentary on your Canvas page. It's called "Sociology is a Martial Art," which is a thing that Bourdieu says or has said at times, um, that he defines sociology as a martial art in the sense that like it's a combat sport, but something that is for self-defense. And I've always liked that notion that sociology, is a means of defense, like to defend people, to defend communities, to defend the planet, to defend nature. That sociology is like a weapon. It's a combat sport, but one that should only be used really for purposes of like defense, self-defense. Oh, what have I done? I have gone to the perusal page and I didn't mean to do that. Here. Okay, so the sociology is a martial art is here. This video. I just wanted to show you like a little bit of it. And then I'll have like a few things to say about that before we get to the end of class. Oh no, that's not the right one. Sorry. Some of this is in French and some of it is in English, but there's subtitles for the French part.
Pierre. Pierre. Bonsoir, plutôt bonjour. Oui, je vais faire une petite présentation et ensuite je vous donne la parole. Let me introduce him very briefly as perhaps the major world figure in sociology. He's a graduate of the École Normale and holds today the chair in sociology at the Collège de France. He's the author of at least 29 books and dozens of articles and monographs. So, without further ado, Professor Pierre Bourdieu. Bon, Pierre, vous voulez commencer alors?
I would like first to thank Edward Said for his invitation to participate in this debate and for his kind words of introduction. I regret that I could not be with you in Chicago on this day due to ill health. Oh là là, c'est terrible le train comme ça. J'ai la bouche complètement sèche, c'est affreux. Heureusement que j'avais un peu à boire, mais c'est incroyable. Oh. C'est dur. Et c'est affreux d'avoir un truc comme ça, mais ça, c'est la sécurité linguistique, ça redouble. En français, ça n'aurait pas été pas pareil.
Nous refaisons aujourd'hui cette logique insupportable, cette logique de l'argent qui est en train de tout broyer, cette logique de l'argent qui est en train de faire de chaque citoyen un exclu en puissance. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes là pour refuser le diktat de l'argent, pour dire que les citoyens doivent reprendre le pouvoir. Et ici, devant vous, avant de rentrer dans le tribunal, l'ensemble des inculpés font le serment que si la justice française ne permet pas au débat d'avoir lieu, si ça veut dire que si on empêche les témoins de parler, si on empêche les paysans d'Amérique du Sud, d'Afrique, d'Asie ou des États-Unis de s'exprimer, eh bien nous quitterons la salle, nous n'avons rien à perdre.
Un questionnement autour de ça, comment ouais, moi j'ai fait des études sociologiques, j'ai toujours fonctionné par passion jusqu'à maintenant, j'arrive à 32 ans. Comment, comment ouais, vivre c'est passionnant, mais c'est à vous que je dois cette situation finalement. Souvent je me dis, vous avez été le détonateur, surtout le révélateur de tout ça. Enfin, moi, ce qui m'a plus marqué en bouche, je comprends maintenant pourquoi j'ai tant aimé dès le début vos écrits, à quel point j'avais plein de choses que je me croyais libre, je ne l'étais pas du tout, de toute la violence symbolique, tout ça. Moi, je vis exactement ce que vous écrivez et puis j'en finis pas depuis 15 ans. Alors, des moments, j'adore, je dois un grand merci, des moments, je suis énervée contre vous.
Ben oui,
c'est une grosse passion. Et puis, tout ce qui se dit maintenant, vous êtes tellement médiatisé, ça m'énerve, tout ce qui se dit autour de vous. Tellement maintenant, avant, il y a 15 ans, je me rappelle, je disais Bourdieu, personne ne connaissait. Et maintenant, c'est d'un ridicule de dire Bourdieu. Enfin, c'est drôlement intéressant pour vous d'analyser ça sûrement aussi. En tout cas, vous faites un travail subversif parce que vous faites des gens qui sont ici d'ailleurs.
Vous allez faire passer des choses, vous allez voir.
Je vous ai écouté, ce que vous disiez sur la culture.
Donc là, il y en a eu vraiment des réunions.
D'ailleurs, excusez-moi, mais il y a 3 ans, j'avais été à un truc qui m'a vraiment marqué. Vous y étiez, c'était pas de ma faute. À Grenoble, il y avait eu les rencontres. Et ça a été aussi un grand moment. Mais vraiment, vous représentez, il y a 2-3 personnes vraiment. En fait, j'ai deux mythes vivants, c'est Kevin
Ah,
business.
Salut. Adieu. Ça va? Ça va? Ça te va, c'est ça?
Jingle.
Sociologie, études scientifiques des phénomènes sociaux et les humains.
Son. Mercredi 1er décembre, 18h-19h sur RDC 95 FM, spécial Pierre Bourdieu. Alors Pierre Bourdieu, pour moi d'abord, il y a une urgence, une nécessité. Ne pas se laisser impressionner par les mots, être nature. Dites-moi tout de suite ce que c'est qu'être sociologue. Vous faites quoi, Pierre Bourdieu? Et si j'osais, vous savez à quoi?
Oui, j'ai entendu là une définition qui a été donnée un peu ironiquement. Je l'ai noté. Et sociologie, étude scientifique des phénomènes sociaux chez les humains.
Exact.
Bon, alors je pense que ceux qui ont entendu la définition n'ont rien compris, moi non plus. C'est une définition, comme la plupart des définitions de dictionnaire, qui est complètement tautologique, qui dit deux fois la même chose. Alors je vais essayer de dire un petit peu mieux, que ce soit pas très facile. Bon, le sociologue, comme tous les scientifiques, essaie d'établir des lois, c'est-à-dire c'est-à-dire des régularités, des manières d'être régulières, et d'en définir les principes. Pourquoi les gens ne font pas n'importe quoi? Pourquoi ils font ce qu'ils font? Pourquoi, par exemple, euh, les fils de professeurs réussissent mieux à l'école que les fils d'ouvriers? Alors, c'est pas pourquoi, ça veut dire essentiellement comment ça se fait que, voilà. Comment ça se fait que ça se passe comme ça, voilà. Comment ça se fait que ça se passe comme ça dans le monde social, et pas autrement.
18h24 sur RDC 95 FM, bienvenue à tous ceux qui viennent de nous rejoindre. Spécial Pierre Bourdieu aujourd'hui, donc qui est avec nous en direct. Pierre Bourdieu, votre œuvre considérable repose sur une idée forte, la reproduction.
Okay, let me stop that share. There was just a few things in there that why I showed that to you, just because it has a few things about Bourdieu that I like and wanted to sort of emphasize. The first, you see him basically giving a talk remotely to a huge auditorium of people in Chicago. It gives you a bit of a sense of the degree of his like celebrity as a kind of an intellectual, and then he has to address uh, the gathering of people in English, and you can see that his English is, not bad, but it's not, like perfect or whatever. Like there's, still a strong accent, and I like that thing where he says like that even he experiences linguistic anxiety, is the term that he uses there, linguistic anxiety. If you've ever like traveled anywhere or been, in a different culture where you didn't speak the language, linguistic anxiety is a real thing, like that sudden inability to communicate with people in a way that you had previously taken for granted. And that's so much of what Bourdieu's work is about, especially around education, is in these degrees of linguistic competency. Again, not necessarily that people are smarter than other people, but that they have a greater degree of linguistic competency that they inherit through their cultural capital. And then in the next scene, you see him basically like at a protest in the 1990s. I don't know if you could really suss out what was happening there, but it's basically like a bunch of farmers that had come to protest against McDonald's. And this was a kind of a movement in France during the 1990s where there was, a great amount of resentment at the way that, um, companies like McDonald's and sort of like the fast food and meat industry, were taking over, land and using resources for their purposes. There's also a great like cultural resentment, like McDonald's was symbolically, kind of like hated by the French because, they have their own like traditions and culinary, culture, of French cuisine that, they feel like is very threatened by not just McDonald's, but the whole kind of like fast food enterprise. They have this term called Coca colonization. The idea that like fast food, and especially like kind of American processed fast food, is like colonizing their culture, in particularly around food, and not just the food itself, but the whole ritual of people eating. The people coming together for a meal is supposed to be this kind of like ritualistic social bond, and what fast food does is it reduces that into just like, kind of like fueling up. You just eat as in a faster, more efficient, and often alone kind of way, as opposed to like sitting down with people for a long meal. And then there's that scene then where he's like walking back, and he's like kind of recognized by that student who never stops talking, and like he can't like get in a word edgewise. But again, you get a sense of just like how well known Bourdieu is, especially in Paris, like, where he's kind of like recognized in the same way that you would recognize a celebrity. Um, it helps kind of underscore, like in France, like intellectuals are, kind of like famous people. This was the case with Foucault also, that, it wouldn't be unusual to see them gossiped about in like the tabloids or something like that. People who are like professors or intellectuals who've written books, are, kind of at a sort of elevated status. And so that student, or former student, like recognizes him on the street. And then you see him doing this radio show where he's doing this interview, with what looks to me possibly like a North African radio show, and he's basically called upon to define what he means by sociology, and then like he then starts talking about like his theory about education, and like how the class inequalities are reproduced through the educational system, in these like, kind of subtle under the radar ways of, through cultural capital and linguistic competency. And so I just wanted to show that opening clip. The link to the film, is on, somebody posted on a Reddit thread, and so I copied that link to your Canvas page in case you're interested in looking at it more. Just kind of, you get the sense from that clip of what the film is just kind of follows Bourdieu, um, towards the end of his life. He died not long after that was made. It just kind of follows him, through, his, kind of like day to day existence as a professor, and a kind of a, known celebrity figure in Paris. And so, the link is there online. In the next class, I'll we're gonna sort of wrap Bourdieu up by talking about this, what he calls the field of cultural production. And so again, this kind of gets us back into the questions of like culture and art and music. And so I have another short little film that I'll show you, in Wednesday's class. In the meantime, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your participation and sharing your thoughts and experiences. And we will again reconvene on Wednesday. In the meantime, have a lovely day, and I'll see you then. Okay.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, Kai. Bye.
Thank you and bye. Yes,
Okay.
see you.
Thank you, Cindy.